Hi. So there are some couple of takes that I have when I talk to customers about buying versus building. So maybe they use some directly Amazon AWS or Azure or GCP or even coding on premises. And they say, hey, why do we need Workato? We can just build it ourselves. So this is what I usually show to them. So hi, Mr. Customer. So what is the added value of Workato? I mean, let's take some history look like where Workato actually came from, right? So there were legacy integration services since the 90s in 2010. And usually the problem with those integration services that they required a lot of hardware. They were very dev centric. They were only supporting batch, had like proprietary languages that no one knew, and there was no central governance. But there were also some good bits about them, like schemas, mapping, visual overview of what is actually going on with those integrations, and there was some quite good debugging in lifecycles management, where a lot of customers started to migrate to the cloud from 2007 as Amazon introduces their services, is that they no longer had to manage their own hardware, no batch, there were standardized languages. If something was missing, you just another service. However, what we see right now as this add another service approach, or maybe if you code yourself, is that it becomes this spaghetti service mesh. It means that there are so many services you can choose from to solve the end-to-end integration scenario that the debugging in lifecycle management becomes just a nightmare. And suddenly what we also see is that some good things that we did learn from legacy integration services, like the schemas, the mapping, visual overview, and lifecycle management, they disappeared because those services, it's very hard to debug them and map them because it's a lot of coding and you need to do it basically yourself from scratch, right? And it is still very dev centric. So when Workato came out 2013, so we thought, how about we combine both worlds together, or the best of the both worlds. So some learnings that we did have with legacy, but also the compute cloud that we have right now. So no hardware required as a customer. You can do real-time events, not just batch. It is standardized languages like Python. If you need to add another service, you just add it in a standardized way that is actually manageable. And of course, there are schemas and mappings. They all help you to create this end-to-end integration scenario. And of course, a central governance that doesn't have just a spaghetti service mesh, but where you actually can govern all these integration scenarios in one place. And of course, debug it and activate citizen development. So this is the important one, is that no longer it is a just development centric platform, but because you have central governance and there is easier way to use these platforms and govern them right now, you can activate also citizen development in them. Of course, there's some negatives with this approach, is that the hardcore developer that is used to code everything themselves, in Lambda or functions, might not like to use something like low code or see it as a tool that is almost too easy. And the on-premise approach, right? So people that are coding on premises, they will of course have the same problem with any cloud computing services that does not support on-prem only. And the next, what I want to see is that, so what if you would rebuild your integration service, but using, for example, an IaaS like Amazon or Azure, right? So platform or infrastructure as a service. So what you would need to do is that typically would do, right? So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of services today that those platforms provide. And if you need to have like DevOps, automated logging, lifecycle management, dashboards, schemas, and mapping, what you do is you pick all those services together, you manage it through configuration or through code, and you bind all those services together. Like there is a storage, you need to have SQL servers and memory databases, logs. Each time there is something executed, you need to have an audit trail that is saved somewhere and then it's stored and backed up. And then when some recipe, or how would you call it, integration is updated, you need to manage, like, how do you manage those resources in dev and how do you manage those resources in test. So there is additional like a redundancy that you need to build in, right? So, and the difference between the colors here, so data in hardware, of course, you don't need to manage today if you would build it yourself, But all of this is something you need to build yourself. What Workato does is that it is still built on top of one of the world's most scalable and famous solutions, so Amazon AWS. We're using something like S3 bucket, but what we do is that you no longer have to not only manage the hardware, but not manage all the life cycle dashboarding, mapping automated logs yourself as well, and binding all those services and then managing all those services yourself, and then trying to create a single place where you can actually see end-to-end overview. So that is what Workato is in essence, is that the only thing you are responsible for is directly going and start working with the actual business logic. So next, so this is more for a marketing persona that tries to maybe create a data set that they can publish in something like Power BI or something similar, right? So how I usually talk with them is like this. So hi, so I see what you have is different services like in business, in HR, in databases, Slack, marketing, and so on. And what would it take to do here if you would want to create like a simple app, right? So low code app, or maybe a dashboard, or maybe like a Slack or a Teams app, or maybe create like a workflow automation. So first, what you need to do, right? So if you want to create this kind of workflow, or let's say app that actually sees some data from multiple systems and edits them, is that you need to connect to that data, right? So you need to have some sort of API connection, or if it's on-premise, then this on-premise connection to files. So what would you use that for today? Well, maybe you have already SMPO, maybe you use something old like bstock, or you use something new like logic apps or Lambda functions in Amazon. The next thing is that you need to store that data somewhere before it goes to that app that is called staging. For example, you would use maybe something like S3 bucket and store it in CSVs or JSON files. Then you run ETL logic on it to actually do something with that data, combine it, clean it, right? Maybe a code or maybe some other tool, and then you store that data as it is being cleaned in memory or in a database. And then finally, what you do is you start creating maybe another code that does actually the process or automates the process or analyzes that process. I mean, you can use something in Celonis, or maybe you just do like a low-level visual here. And sometimes you need to even create an like external API for all this data that has been hidden here, right? And maybe you use something like IPG or Azure API management. And finally, you create that app in Power App or Mendix, right? So there are lots of different tools here. And what it is still an integration end-to-end scenario. And what Workato is doing is trying to connect, integrate, and automate all of this in one single flow, right? And to make it easier for you, because lots of our customers that are using Workato, they're not even aware that we are, in the background. They don't even know we're staging this data for them. We are, storing that in a database so that it can be very easily accessible immediately in memory. When they create an API management, there's a whole layer behind services that create an insecure endpoint to the public and so on, right? So if you would design this kind of service yourself, you will need to basically create Workato yourself from scratch. Thank you.